Hi, boys and girls. I'm back today with another story for you. And this is another story by our author, Kevin Henkes. Go ahead and show you the cover there real quick. So in this story, we are going to be focusing on our problem and solution again. So if you remember, a problem is kind of something that the character in the story, or the main character in the story, faces, kind of gives them trouble, okay, or upsets them, or, something that happens. We know what a problem is. And what I want you to focus on in this story is, what is the solution? Does the problem actually get solved or not? Okay, and we'll kind of talk about that at the end, because this story is a little bit unique in how the solution for the problem comes about. And I want to see if you can kind of keep a close eye for that while we are reading Lilly's Big Day by Kevin Henkes, okay? One day, Lilly's teacher, Mr. Slinger, announced to the class that he was going to marry Miss Shotwell, the school nurse. Lilly's heart leaped. She had always wanted to be a flower girl. "Well, it'll be the biggest day of my life," said Mr. Slinger. "Mine too," whispered Lilly. At home in her room, Lilly practiced being a flower girl. First, she changed into something more appropriate. Then she held her head high and smiled brightly and raised her eyebrows, turned her head from side to side, and carried her hands proudly in front of her and hummed, "Here Comes the Bride," and walked the length of her room very, very slowly, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. "It will be the biggest day of my life," said Lilly. Who are you pretending to be tonight? Asked Lilly's mother at dinner. "Well, I'm not pretending," said Lilly. "I'm a flower girl." "Well, who's getting married?" asked her father. "Mr. Slinger," said Lilly. "Really?" said her mother. "Really?" said her father. "Really?" said Lilly. "He's going to marry Miss Shotwell. He told us today, and I'm going to be the flower girl." "You are?" said her father. "Did Mr. Slinger ask you?" said her mother. "Oh, not yet," said Lilly. At bedtime, Lilly's mother said, "Lilly, there are so many students in your class. Mr. Slinger couldn't possibly pick just one to be a flower girl." Her father said, "It just wouldn't be fair." "He probably has a niece," said her mother. "Maybe Aunt Mona will get married someday," said her father. "Do you understand what we're trying to say?" asked her mother. Lilly nodded. "Mm-hmm." "Are you sure?" asked her father. Lilly nodded again. "Mm-hmm." After her parents left her room, Lilly said, "I understand that I'm going to be a flower girl." The next day at school during sharing time, Lilly said, "I've always wanted to be a flower girl, even more than a surgeon or a diva or a hairdresser." The following afternoon, when Mr. Slinger had recess duty, Lilly picked a handful of weeds at the edge of the playground. She carried the weeds proudly in front of her and walked very, very slowly past Mr. Slinger until the bell rang. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the morning after that, Lilly went to the light bulb lab in the back of the classroom. She drew a self-portrait. Me, Lilly, the world's best and most famous flower girl. Mr. Slinger called Lilly up to his desk during quiet reading time. "Lilly," he said, "I could tell that you want to be a flower girl, but unfortunately,
My niece, Ginger, is going to be the flower girl at my wedding.
Lily's heart sank.
But,
Said Mr. Slinger,
I also want you to know that everyone in the class will be invited to the wedding. We can all dance together at the reception. It'll be fun.
Lily's stomach hurt.
This seems really important to you,
said Mr. Slinger. Lily's cheeks turned pink.
You know,
said Mr. Slinger,
I was just thinking that you might like to be Ginger's assistant. You could stand with her and keep her company until she has to walk down the aisle. You could make sure her dress isn't crooked and that she holds her flowers properly.
Lily considered this.
You can also remind her to walk slowly,
said Mr. Slinger. Lily considered some more.
You could wear a corsage,
said Mr. Slinger. Oh, all right, said Lily, if you really need me so much. Lily tried to get excited about being Ginger's assistant. Weddings wouldn't even exist without flower girl assistants, she told her baby brother, Julius. I have a special responsibility, she told her parents. When her Grammy took her shopping for a new dress for the wedding, Lily told the clerk, a flower girl assistant is very important. Important and glamorous. But when it really sank in that she would not be walking down the aisle carrying a bouquet of flowers with everyone watching, Lily pretended that her teddy bear was Mr. Slinger. She made him sit in the uncooperative chair. And you can just stay there forever, she said. As the wedding drew near, Mr. Slinger counted down the days on the chalkboard.
1 day closer to the biggest day of my life,
he would say.
1 day closer to the biggest day of Ginger's life, Lily would whisper.
And still, at home in her room, Lily practiced. She held her head high and smiled brightly and raised her eyebrows and turned her head from side to side and carried her hands proudly in front of her and hummed Here Comes the Bride and walked the length of her room very, very slowly, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The day of the wedding finally arrived. Lily hoped and hoped that Ginger would have pink eye or a bad fever and just not show up. But she was there, and she was all ready, and her dress was straight, and she held her flowers properly. Are you sure you want to do this? Said Lily.
Yes,
said Ginger. Are you sure you're sure?
Yes.
Are you really sure you're sure? Lily hoped and hoped that Ginger would change her mind, but she didn't. It was time for the ceremony to begin. The music swelled. Everyone stood. The big moment came for Ginger to walk down the aisle, but Ginger didn't move. Mr. Slinger motioned her forward. Go, said Lily. Ginger was frozen. Now, said Lily. Ginger was as still as a stone. You can do it, said Lily. But Ginger couldn't. Everyone waited and waited and waited. No one knew what to do except Lily. Lily scooped up Ginger and said, Here we go. Then Lily walked very, very slowly down the aisle. She held her head high and smiled brightly and raised her eyebrows and turned her head from side to side and carried Ginger proudly in front of her. When she reached Mr. Slinger, everyone clapped. "I knew this would be the biggest day of my life," said Lilly. Lilly was so excited she barely noticed the rest of the ceremony. The reception was great fun. After the cake was served, Lilly coached Ginger for the next time she would be a flower girl. "I won't be with you at every wedding," said Lilly. "I won't be able to save you every time." Together they walked back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, very, very slowly. Soon they were dancing. And soon after that, they were joined by Chester, Wilson, Victor, Julius, Mr. Slinger, Miss Shotwell, and many others.
"Well, it's interpretive dance,"
said Mr. Slinger. "We're doing the flower girl," said Lilly. Lily's family stayed at the reception until Lilly was perfectly exhausted. "But there's something I have to do before we go," said Lilly. She needed to find Ginger one last time. And when she did, she said, "Ginger, when I get married, you can be my flower girl." So that was our story, Lily's Big Day. And I just want to talk real quick about what was the problem in that story and what was the solution. Because I told you to kind of keep a close eye out and a close ear out for that because it was a little bit unique in this story. So what was our problem or what went wrong in the story? Good. Lilly really wanted to be the flower girl, and she kind of thought she was going to be, but then Mr. Slinger told her, "No, you're actually not going to be the flower girl. My niece Ginger is going to be the flower girl, so I already have one." And how did that make Lilly feel? Right, she was very upset, very sad, maybe even a little bit mad, you might have said. So this is the part that was a little bit different about this story. What was the solution to that problem? Did Lilly get to be the flower girl? No, not exactly, but how was the problem still solved anyway? Did Lilly stay upset or sad or mad the whole story? No, she didn't. Ginger kind of got too nervous and sort of froze. And what did Lilly do to kind of solve the problem of her not being the flower girl and Lilly or Ginger kind of freezing with fear at the wedding? Yeah, Lilly decided to pick her up and carry her down. So Ginger did the job of the flower girl, but also kind of Lilly did the job of the flower girl. And how did that make Lilly feel at the end of the story? Yeah, she felt much better. She was very happy. She had a great time at the wedding, had a lot of fun dancing. And at the end of the story, she even told Ginger what? Yeah, she said, "At my wedding, you can be my flower girl." So even though our problem wasn't really solved, Lilly didn't technically get to be the flower girl. It was sort of solved in a different way. And all of our characters ended up happy in our story. And even though she didn't get to be the flower girl, I would say that that problem was solved anyway. So that was kind of a different way to kind of look and figure out a problem, even though it wasn't solved. So I hope you really liked our story, Lily's Big Day today. Another story from Kevin Henkes. He has a lot of great stories that we've read so far, and I believe we might even have a few more that we will read later this year. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.